They thought she was just another black doctor they could silence. When Chief Richard Brennan threw Dr. Jasmine Marshall's patient file across the ER floor, he wasn't just humiliating a doctor, he was starting a war. "You think your degree makes you untouchable?" Brennan's voice cut through the emergency room. "I've destroyed better doctors than you." His face was inches from hers, rage burning in his eyes. Jasmine stood perfectly still, her white coat stained with blood from the patient she'd just saved. The patient his son had nearly killed. "Your son misdiagnosed a stroke," she said quietly. "That patient would be dead if I hadn't intervened." Brennan's hand shot out, ripping her ID badge from her coat. The fabric tore. "You're suspended. Security will escort you out." He threw the badge at her feet. "When I'm done, you'll never practice medicine again." Jasmine picked up her badge slowly, hands steady. "We'll see about that." What Brennan didn't know was that Dr. Thomas Griffin, State Medical Board Director and Jasmine's former mentor, had just witnessed everything. They came for the wrong doctor. And they never saw the reckoning coming. If you believe that no one should ever face discrimination in healthcare based on their race, let me know in the comments below. Share your country and city. Let's see where people stand against medical discrimination worldwide. Your participation shows that accountability knows no borders. 6 hours earlier, Dr. Jasmine Marshall had walked into St. Mary's Medical Center for what should have been a routine night shift. At 35, she was one of the youngest attending physicians in the emergency department, a position she'd earned through relentless dedication and brilliant diagnostic skills. Her colleagues respected her, her patients trusted her, and Chief Richard Brennan had spent the past year trying to find a reason to remove her. The ER was unusually quiet when she arrived, the calm before the inevitable storm of Friday night emergencies. Jasmine reviewed patient charts at the nurses' station, her focus absolute. Zoe Mitchell, her best friend and fellow ER doctor, slid into the chair beside her. "Brennan's been asking about you again," Zoe whispered, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Wanted to know about your patient outcomes, complaint history, everything." "Let him look," Jasmine replied calmly, though her jaw tightened. "My record speaks for itself." Zoe's expression turned worried. "Jazz, you know what happened to Dr. Patterson last year. One complaint from Brennan's office and she was gone. Transferred to some clinic in the middle of nowhere." "Patterson made actual mistakes. I don't." Jasmine met her friend's eyes. "I'm not going to practice scared, Zoe. That's exactly what he wants." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the ambulance bay. Paramedics rushed in with a patient on a gurney, a middle-aged man convulsing violently. Behind them, looking annoyed at being disturbed, was Dr. Derek Brennan, the chief's son and a second-year resident with an ego far exceeding his abilities. "Drunk driver," Derek announced dismissively to the triage nurse. "Found passed out in his car, reeking of alcohol, probably withdrawals. Start him on IV fluids and thiamine." Jasmine approached the gurney, her instincts immediately on alert. Something about the patient's presentation didn't fit Derek's casual diagnosis. "Did you run a full neurological assessment?" she asked. Derek's expression soured. "I don't need a full neuro for a drunk, Dr. Marshall. This is textbook alcohol withdrawal." "His pupils are unequal," Jasmine observed, leaning closer to examine the patient. "And that's not typical withdrawal convulsions. Look at the left-sided weakness." "I've got this under control," Derek snapped, his voice rising. "Unless you're questioning my clinical judgment?" Jasmine straightened, her tone professional but firm. "Yes, I am. This patient needs an immediate CT scan. I'm seeing signs of a stroke, not intoxication." The ER went quiet. Nurses exchanged nervous glances. Everyone knew that challenging a Brennan, especially the chief's son, was career suicide. Derek's face flushed red with humiliation and rage. "You're overstepping," he hissed. "I'm the admitting physician. This is my patient." "Not anymore." Jasmine turned to the nearest nurse. "Get him to CT now. Call neurology for a stroke protocol. Every minute counts." As the patient was rushed toward imaging, Derek pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling with anger as he typed a message. Jasmine knew exactly who he was texting. Within 10 minutes, Chief Richard Brennan would know that she'd publicly contradicted his son. The war had begun, though Jasmine didn't fully realize it yet. The CT results came back 40 minutes later, just as Jasmine was starting the patient on tissue plasminogen activator. Massive ischemic stroke, caught within the treatment window because of her intervention. The radiologist's report was unequivocal. Derek's misdiagnosis would have killed the man within hours. Jasmine was documenting the case when she heard heavy footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Chief Richard Brennan striding through the ER, his expression thunderous. Derek walked beside him, whispering urgently. This was the moment that would change everything. What Dr. Jasmine Marshall didn't know was that saving a patient's life that night would mark her as Chief Brennan's next target. The file hit the floor with a sharp crack, scattering papers across the emergency room tiles. Doctors and nurses froze mid-motion, conversations dying instantly. Chief Richard Brennan stood in the center of the ER, like a storm personified, his eyes locked on Jasmine with undisguised hatred. My office. Now. His voice was dangerously quiet, but it carried across the entire department. Jasmine closed the patient chart she'd been updating, her movements deliberately calm despite the adrenaline flooding her system. I'm in the middle of documenting critical care, Chief. It can wait until... It cannot wait. Brennan stepped closer, invading her personal space. Several staff members pulled out their phones, sensing something significant was happening. When I give an order in my hospital, Dr. Marshall, you follow it. Immediately. This is hardly your hospital, Jasmine replied evenly, holding her ground. And patient care takes precedence over administrative meetings. I'll come to your office when my documentation is complete. The challenge hung in the air between them. Everyone watching knew this wasn't really about timing or protocol. This was about power, about a chief of medicine who'd run St. Mary's like his personal kingdom for 2 decades, and a young black woman who refused to bow. Brennan's smile was cold. Then let me make this simple. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. Your reckless intervention tonight nearly cost this hospital a lawsuit. Dr. Derek Brennan had the situation under control until you decided to grandstand, overriding a physician's clinical judgment based on what? Your gut feeling? Jasmine's eyes narrowed. Based on actual symptoms, unequal pupils, left-sided weakness, atypical seizure presentation, all signs of stroke that your son missed because he didn't bother to perform a proper neurological exam. He performed an adequate assessment for the presentation, Brennan shot back. A drunk driver with withdrawal symptoms. You wasted hospital resources on unnecessary imaging and expensive medications. I saved a man's life. Jasmine's voice remained steady, but her hands curled into fists at her sides. The CT confirmed a massive stroke. Without immediate treatment, he would have died. The radiologist's report proves that you got lucky. Brennan cut her off. This time. But your cowboy medicine, your need to be the hero, it creates liability. It undermines team cohesion. It makes other physicians second-guess themselves. Zoe stepped forward from where she'd been watching. Chief Brennan, with respect, Dr. Marshall's diagnosis was correct. The patient is stable now because of her intervention. Dr. Mitchell, I don't recall asking for your input. Brennan's gaze shifted to Zoe, cold and warning. Unless you'd like to join Dr. Marshall in defending reckless behavior. Zoe fell silent, but her expression remained defiant. Jasmine touched her friend's arm gently, a silent communication. Don't make this worse. Brennan turned back to Jasmine. You're suspended pending an investigation into tonight's events. 2 weeks, unpaid. During that time, the Medical Review Board will examine your recent cases for similar patterns of overreach and insubordination. The ER erupted in whispers. Suspension was rare, especially for a physician with Jasmine's spotless record. This wasn't protocol. It was punishment. On what grounds? Jasmine demanded, her composure finally cracking. I followed every protocol. I made the correct diagnosis. You can't suspend me for doing my job correctly. I can suspend you for undermining another physician's authority, for creating a hostile work environment, and for demonstrating a pattern of behavior that suggests you believe your judgment supersedes that of your colleagues. Brennan recited the charges like he'd been preparing them for months. Your badge and access card, now. That's when he grabbed her badge, ripping it from her coat with unnecessary force. The sound of tearing fabric seemed impossibly loud in the stunned silence. He threw the badge at her feet with theatrical disdain. Security will escort you out, he continued. You're not to return to hospital property until the investigation concludes. If you're found in violation of this suspension, it will become permanent. Jasmine bent slowly, retrieving her badge from the floor. Her white coat hung askew from where he'd torn it, and she was acutely aware of every eye in the ER watching this humiliation. This was the moment Brennan wanted. The proud Dr. Marshall brought low, made an example of. But as she straightened, meeting his triumphant gaze, Jasmine saw something flicker in his expression. Uncertainty. Because she wasn't crying, wasn't begging, wasn't showing the fear he'd expected. We'll see about that, she said quietly. That's when she noticed the older man standing in the ER entrance, a visitor's badge clipped to his expensive suit. Dr. Thomas Griffin, her mentor from Johns Hopkins, former dean of medicine, and current director of the state medical board. His face was grave as he took in the scene, his phone already in his hand, recording. Brennan hadn't seen him yet, but he would. And when he did, everything would change. The medical chart that proved Derek Brennan's misdiagnosis would either end Jasmine's career or expose a dangerous pattern of negligence. The hospital parking garage was nearly empty at 2 a.m. when Jasmine finally left St. Mary's, escorted by security like a criminal. Her hands shook as she unlocked her car, the adrenaline from the confrontation finally catching up with her. She sat in the driver's seat, staring at her torn white coat, and allowed herself exactly 60 seconds of fury before forcing her breathing to steady. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Coffee? Now? You know where? TG. Jasmine's heart lifted slightly. Thomas Griffin. Of course he'd reach out immediately. She started her car and drove to the 24-hour diner 3 blocks from the hospital, the one where she and her mentor had shared countless meals during her residency when he'd been teaching at the affiliated medical school. Griffin was already in their usual booth when she arrived, 2 cups of coffee waiting. He stood as she approached, pulling her into a brief hug before gesturing for her to sit. Tell me everything, he said simply. For 20 minutes, Jasmine recounted the entire night. Derek's misdiagnosis, her intervention, Brennan's public humiliation. Griffin listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. He's done this before, Griffin said when she finished. Brennan. This exact pattern. I've been hearing rumors for months about talented physicians leaving St. Mary's under mysterious circumstances. Dr. Patterson, Dr. Chen, Dr. Williams, all women, 2 of them women of color. I knew about Patterson, Jasmine admitted, but I thought it was legitimate. Performance issues. That's what Brennan excels at, making it look legitimate. Griffin pulled out a tablet, opening a file. I started digging after the 3rd physician left in 6 months. All brilliant doctors. All filed complaints about Brennan's behavior before they were forced out. All complaints mysteriously disappeared. Jasmine leaned forward, scanning the documents. Performance reviews that didn't match the physician's actual records. Patient complaints that couldn't be verified. Accusations of unprofessional behavior that seemed to materialize from nowhere. It was a system designed to destroy careers while maintaining plausible deniability. He's been building cases against them for months before striking, Griffin continued. Creating paper trails of minor infractions, collecting statements from loyal staff members, manufacturing evidence of incompetence. By the time he moves openly, the target is already buried under documentation. So I'm next. It wasn't a question. You've been next since the day you questioned his son's clinical judgment in front of other physicians. Tonight was just the opening move. Griffin's eyes were serious. Jasmine, this man has been chief of medicine at St. Mary's for 20 years. He has the hospital board in his pocket, political connections throughout the state, and a legal team that specializes in making problems disappear. If we're going to fight him, we need to be smart. We? Jasmine looked at her mentor hopefully. Did you think I'd let him destroy another talented physician without a fight? Griffin smiled grimly. I'm the director of the state medical board. Brennan's been operating outside our oversight because St. Mary's is a private hospital, but medical licenses are under our jurisdiction. If we can prove he's been systematically removing physicians for discriminatory reasons, we can build a case. How? Documentation. Evidence. Witnesses willing to testify. Griffin started making notes. The physicians he forced out, we contact them, get their stories on record. We review every complaint filed against Brennan that was dismissed. We look at his son's medical record. I'm betting Derek has a history of mistakes that Daddy covered up. Jasmine felt hope stirring for the first time since the confrontation. The patient from tonight, the stroke victim, his case proves Derek's negligence. It's a start, Griffin agreed. But Brennan will argue it was a judgment call, a difference of medical opinion. We need more. We need a pattern. Over the next hour, they planned their strategy. Griffin would quietly contact the displaced physicians. Jasmine would document everything, every interaction with Brennan, every piece of correspondence, every witness to tonight's events. They would be careful, methodical, giving Brennan no indication they were building a case. He'll move fast, Griffin warned as they prepared to leave. The suspension was just to get you out of the building. Next comes the official investigation, which he controls. Expect falsified complaints, manufactured evidence, colleagues suddenly remembering incidents that never happened. Brennan's had years to perfect this system. How long do we have? 2 weeks until your suspension ends, but the real attack will come sooner. Griffin stood, placing a hand on her shoulder. Jasmine, I need you to understand something. This won't be easy. Brennan has destroyed careers of people who fought back. He's ruthless, connected, and he doesn't lose. Neither do I, Jasmine replied firmly. As she drove home in the pre-dawn darkness, Jasmine's phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made her blood run cold. Official complaint. Patient endangerment. The email, sent from St. Mary's Legal Department at 3:47 a.m., detailed a formal complaint filed by Chief Richard Brennan regarding her reckless medical intervention that had allegedly endangered a patient and violated hospital protocol. Attached were statements from 3 physicians and 2 nurses, all describing her as aggressive, insubordinate, and professionally unstable. The statements were dated from the past 6 months. Incidents Jasmine didn't remember because they'd never happened. Brennan hadn't just started tonight. He'd been building his case for months, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Chief Brennan's next move wouldn't just threaten Jasmine's reputation, it would put patients' lives at risk. The falsified complaint arrived at the State Medical Board headquarters on Monday morning, hand-delivered by St. Mary's legal team. Dr. Thomas Griffin received it directly, his expression carefully neutral as he reviewed the thick file of accusations against Dr. Jasmine Marshall. To anyone watching, he appeared to be simply performing his duties as board director. No one knew he'd been expecting exactly this move. Jasmine sat in her apartment, staring at her phone as the implications sank in. If the medical board acted on Brennan's complaint, her medical license could be suspended pending investigation. Without her license, she couldn't practice anywhere, couldn't earn income, couldn't fight back. Brennan had found the perfect weapon. Her phone rang. Griffin's voice was calm but urgent. Don't panic. I've got the complaint here. It's impressive in its thoroughness and completely fabricated in its substance. Can they actually suspend my license over this? Jasmine asked, hating the tremor in her voice. Not without a hearing, which buys us time, and not without evidence which they don't actually have despite this file of fiction. Griffin paused. But Jasmine, this is worse than I thought. Brennan didn't just manufacture recent incidents. He's backdated complaints spanning 18 months, with signatures from staff members who may not even realize their names are being used. That's fraud. Yes. Which means we're not just dealing with medical board violations. This is criminal. Griffin's tone shifted to something harder. I've sent the complaint to a contact at the DOJ Civil Rights Division. If Brennan's been systematically removing minority physicians through fraudulent documentation, that's a federal case. Jasmine felt a spark of hope. How long until they can act? Federal investigations move slowly, weeks, maybe months. Griffin sighed. But I can delay the medical board proceedings, insist on thorough review, request additional documentation. Meanwhile, we work our own investigation. That afternoon, Jasmine met with Zoe at a coffee shop far from the hospital. Her friend arrived looking anxious, glancing over her shoulder like she expected Brennan's security to appear. "I shouldn't be here," Zoe whispered as she sat down. "Brennan's watching everyone who was in the ER that night. He called me into his office this morning, asked about our friendship, about conversations we've had regarding his leadership." "What did you tell him?" "That we're colleagues, nothing more." Zoe's eyes were apologetic. "Jazz, I'm sorry, but I have student loans, a mortgage. I can't lose this job." "I'm not asking you to risk your career," Jasmine assured her. "I just need to know. That night, did you see Derek's initial assessment of the stroke patient?" Zoe glanced around nervously before pulling out her phone. "I took photos. Of his notes, of the timeline, of everything. I had a feeling Brennan would try to rewrite history." She showed Jasmine the images. Derek's handwriting clearly noted suspected ETOH withdrawal, without any mention of neurological examination. The timestamp proved Jasmine's intervention had occurred within minutes of the patient's arrival, not hours later, as Brennan's complaint suggested. "This is evidence," Jasmine breathed. "It's also my career if anyone finds out I gave it to you." Zoe sent the photos to Jasmine's encrypted email. "The official chart has been modified. I checked this morning. Derek's notes now include a full neuro exam that he never performed. Someone in medical records altered the documentation." "That's medical fraud. That's St. Mary's under Richard Brennan." Zoe stood to leave. "Be careful, Jazz. He's not just coming for your license. I've heard things. Threats about criminal charges, malpractice suits, things that would destroy you completely." After Zoe left, Jasmine reviewed the photos she'd received. The evidence was clear. Derek had failed to perform basic assessments, and the medical chart had been altered to cover up that failure. But who could she trust with this information? Who had the authority to investigate chart tampering at a private hospital? The answer came from an unexpected source. That evening, she received a call from William Cooper, a retired civil rights attorney who'd been the stroke patient she'd saved. He'd woken up that morning, learned what had happened, and wanted to talk. "Dr. Marshall." His voice was weak, but determined. "They told me you saved my life, that the first doctor thought I was drunk and would have sent me home. You're recovering well, Mr. Cooper. That's what matters. What matters is that I heard what happened to you." Cooper's tone hardened. "I was a civil rights lawyer for 40 years. I know retaliation when I see it, and I know that young doctor's mistake should have been in my medical chart. But when I requested my records this morning, his notes magically show he diagnosed me correctly." Jasmine's pulse quickened. "You have copies of the altered chart?" "I have copies, and I have contacts at the Philadelphia DA's office who specialize in medical fraud. If you're willing to fight this, Dr. Marshall, you've got an ally who knows exactly how these systems work and how to tear them down." For the first time since the suspension, Jasmine felt the balance of power beginning to shift. Brennan had money, political connections, and institutional support. But she had the truth, documented evidence, and now a legal expert who'd spent his career fighting institutional corruption. She spent the evening working with Cooper via phone, documenting every detail of Brennan's retaliation. The attorney explained how they could build a case not just for medical board violations, but for civil rights violations, fraud, and conspiracy. Each falsified complaint, each altered chart, each witness coerced into lying, all of it created a pattern of systematic corruption. "Brennan thinks he's untouchable because he's been getting away with this for years," Cooper explained. "But powerful men often overreach. They get sloppy when they think they've already won." That night, Jasmine received an anonymous email. The sender had used an encrypted service, leaving no trace of their identity. The message was brief. "You're not the first. Meet me tomorrow, 2 p.m. Rittenhouse Square, Southwest Bench. I have proof of what Brennan did to the others." Jasmine showed the email to Griffin, who immediately ran it through security analysis. "Could be a trap," he warned. "Brennan trying to catch you violating your suspension terms or attempting to manufacture evidence." "Or it could be someone else he destroyed," Jasmine countered. "Someone who's been waiting for another victim to fight back." They decided she would go, but Griffin would be nearby with his own security. If this was a trap, they'd document it as more evidence of Brennan's harassment. If it was legitimate, they might gain the smoking gun they needed. The falsified complaint sitting on the medical board's desk contained one lie that could destroy everything Jasmine had built. But it also contained something Brennan hadn't anticipated: the seeds of his own downfall. Rittenhouse Square was crowded with lunch hour visitors when Jasmine arrived at 1:50 p.m. She spotted Griffin immediately, sitting on a bench across the park with a newspaper, his security detail scattered strategically among the pedestrians. The Southwest bench was empty. She sat down, her heart pounding, and waited. At precisely 2:00 p.m., a woman in her mid-40s approached. She was well-dressed, professional, but there was a wariness in her eyes that Jasmine recognized, the look of someone who'd been hunted and learned to stay alert. "Dr. Marshall?" the woman asked quietly, sitting down but keeping her body angled for a quick departure. "I'm Dr. Patricia Chen. I worked at St. Mary's until 8 months ago." Jasmine remembered the name from Griffin's research. The oncologist. "You left after Richard Brennan destroyed my career for refusing to falsify a patient's diagnosis to cover up his son's mistake." Chen's voice was bitter but controlled. "Derek Brennan missed a cancer diagnosis in a 52-year-old woman, told her she had benign cysts. I saw her 3 months later when the cancer had metastasized. Stage 4, inoperable. She would have been stage 1 if Derek had done his job." "Did you report it?" "I filed a formal complaint with the hospital's medical review board. 2 days later, I was suspended for allegedly prescribing controlled substances without proper documentation. Complete fabrication, but Brennan had created a paper trail going back months. Prescriptions I'd never written, patient complaints I'd never heard about, all of it documented and signed by staff members who either didn't know they were lying or were coerced into it." Chen pulled out a flash drive. "I kept copies of everything before they locked me out of the system. Original patient charts before they were modified, emails showing Brennan's directives to alter documentation, recorded conversations with staff members admitting they were pressured to file false complaints. Everything." Jasmine took the drive carefully. "Why didn't you fight back?" "I tried. I got an attorney. Filed a wrongful termination suit, went to the medical board with evidence of fraud." Chen's expression darkened. "Brennan's lawyers buried me in motions, delayed hearings for months, and meanwhile spread rumors about my alleged drug problem. My husband was contacted by CPS about potential child endangerment. My elderly mother received threatening calls suggesting her Medicare coverage might be reviewed for fraud. Brennan didn't just attack me, he went after everyone I loved." "So you settled?" "I took a settlement that required me to sign an NDA, move out of state, and never practice medicine in Pennsylvania again." Chen's hands clenched. "I'm violating that agreement by being here. If Brennan finds out, I lose the settlement money and face legal action, but I can't let him keep doing this." Jasmine studied the flash drive. "How many others?" "I know of 5 physicians definitively, probably more who left quietly without fighting." Chen pulled out a folded paper. "Names, contact information for those willing to talk if subpoenaed. They're all terrified of Brennan, but they might testify if there's real legal protection." As they talked, Jasmine noticed a man in a dark suit photographing them from across the park. She subtly gestured to Griffin, who immediately signaled his security team. Within minutes, they had the photographer cornered, a private investigator hired by St. Mary's legal department to document Jasmine conspiring to manufacture evidence. "Perfect," Griffin said with grim satisfaction as his team confiscated the camera. "More proof of Brennan's harassment campaign. And look, He showed Jasmine the PI's phone, which contained text messages from someone named RB, ordering surveillance and specifically requesting compromising photos. Chen stood to leave, but Jasmine stopped her. "Dr. Chen, would you be willing to give an official statement to federal investigators? The DOJ is reviewing this as a potential civil rights case." Chen's eyes widened. "Federal? You've got the DOJ involved?" "A contact is reviewing the evidence," Griffin interjected. "No formal investigation yet, but with your testimony and documentation, that could change quickly." For a long moment, Chen was silent. Jasmine could see the war in her expression, fear of Brennan's retaliation versus the hope of finally seeing justice. "I have children," Chen finally said. "Brennan threatened them last time." "This time he's facing federal investigators," Griffin assured her. "If he threatens witnesses, that's felony obstruction, and we'll make sure you have protection." Chen nodded slowly. "Okay, yes. I'll testify. Someone needs to stop him." After Chen left, Jasmine and Griffin reviewed the contents of the flash drive in Griffin's car. What they found was devastating. Not just evidence of Chen's case, but a pattern of systematic fraud spanning years. Modified patient charts, falsified performance reviews, manufactured complaints, all bearing the hallmarks of Brennan's methodology. "This is enough for criminal charges," Griffin breathed. "Medical fraud, conspiracy, witness tampering. Brennan didn't just bend the rules, he created an entire system of corruption." But as they prepared to take the evidence to federal authorities, Jasmine's phone rang. The caller ID showed St. Mary's Legal Department. "Dr. Marshall," the attorney's voice was coldly professional, "I'm calling to inform you that an additional complaint has been filed regarding your conduct. A patient has come forward, alleging you performed an unnecessary procedure that resulted in lasting harm. The medical board will be conducting an emergency review tomorrow at 9 a.m. Your license will be automatically suspended pending the hearing." Jasmine's blood ran cold. "What patient? What procedure? All details will be provided at the hearing. I suggest you obtain legal representation." The line went dead. Griffin immediately made calls, trying to get information about the mysterious complaint. Within an hour, they had their answer. The patient was a woman named Margaret Stevens, who claimed Jasmine had performed an emergency intubation that damaged her trachea during a shift 6 months ago. The problem? Jasmine had been at a medical conference in Boston that entire week. She'd never treated anyone named Margaret Stevens. "He's getting desperate," Griffin said. "This is so easily disproved that it's almost insulting. Or it's a distraction," Jasmine realized. "While we're fighting this obvious fabrication, what's he really doing?" The answer came that evening. Zoe called, her voice panicked. "Jazz, they're raiding your locker at the hospital. Police are here with a warrant. Something about controlled substances found in your possession. Brennan's telling everyone you had a drug problem, that you were stealing medications for personal use." Jasmine felt the room spin. This was it, Brennan's real attack. Not just her reputation or her license, but criminal charges that would destroy any chance of fighting back. "Get photos," she told Zoe urgently. "Document everything. Who's planting evidence, what they're claiming to find, all of it." As she hung up, Griffin was already on his phone with his DOJ contact. "We need intervention now," he said forcefully. "Brennan's moved from harassment to framing her for drug crimes. This is crossing into federal obstruction if he's manufacturing evidence while under investigation." What Brennan didn't know was that every threat, every act of sabotage was being documented by someone he'd underestimated. But the window for stopping him was closing fast. The emergency medical board hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m., but by 7 a.m., the story had already hit local news. Prominent ER doctor suspended amid drug allegations, ran on 3 channels, complete with Jasmine's photo and vague references to ongoing investigations into substance abuse and patient endangerment. Jasmine sat in Griffin's office, watching the media circus unfold. Her phone had been ringing nonstop. Former colleagues, friends, even family members who'd seen the news and didn't know what to believe. "Don't answer," Griffin advised. "Anything you say can be twisted. We let the evidence speak at the hearing." "What evidence?" Jasmine gestured at the news. They found prescription medications in my locker with my fingerprints on the bottles. The hospital's security footage allegedly shows me accessing the medication storage after hours. Brennan's created a complete narrative. A narrative we can dismantle. Griffin pulled up files on his computer. The medications found in your locker were prescribed to patients you never treated, on dates when you weren't even in the hospital. I've pulled your actual schedules, security logs showing you weren't on premises those nights, credit card receipts proving you were elsewhere. He'll say I falsified my schedules. Harder to falsify credit card companies and cell tower data. Griffin showed her detailed records. Your phone was pinging towers near your apartment when you were supposedly stealing drugs from the hospital. Unless you've learned to be in two places at once, his story falls apart. William Cooper arrived at 8 a.m., rolling into the office in a wheelchair but looking energized. His recovery from the stroke was remarkable, his speech clearer each day. Dr. Marshall, I filed an emergency motion with the medical board requesting I be allowed to testify on your behalf. They've granted it. Mr. Cooper, you're still recovering. You don't need to... I need to make sure the doctor who saved my life doesn't get destroyed by the man whose son nearly killed me. Cooper's tone was firm. Besides, I'm a patient with direct experience of both Dr. Derek Brennan's negligence and your exceptional care. My testimony is relevant. At 8:30 a.m., they arrived at the medical board headquarters to find a media circus outside. Reporters shouted questions as Griffin's security team escorted Jasmine through the crowd. She kept her head high, refusing to hide her face or show shame she didn't feel. The hearing room was packed. Members of the medical board sat at a long table at the front. Brennan was there with St. Mary's legal team, looking confident. Behind him sat Derek, smirking, and several hospital administrators. On Jasmine's side were Griffin, Cooper, and an attorney. Griffin had brought in from the Civil Rights Division. The board chairman, Dr. Howard Ellis, called the meeting to order. We're here to review emergency complaints filed against Dr. Jasmine Marshall regarding alleged substance abuse, theft of controlled medications, and patient endangerment. Chief Brennan, please present your evidence. For 30 minutes, Brennan's lawyers laid out their case. Photos of medication bottles found in Jasmine's locker. Security footage allegedly showing her accessing restricted areas. Testimony from a pharmacy technician claiming Jasmine had asked suspicious questions about medication storage. The patient complaint from Margaret Stevens about the botched intubation. It was comprehensive, detailed, and almost completely fabricated. When it was Griffin's turn, he methodically destroyed each piece of evidence. He showed Jasmine's actual work schedules proving she wasn't at the hospital when the alleged thefts occurred. He presented cell phone data and credit card receipts placing her miles away. He revealed that Margaret Stevens had never been a patient at St. Mary's. In fact, she was a paralegal who worked for a firm that frequently represented the hospital. The medical board received a complaint from a woman who doesn't exist in any patient database, Griffin stated coldly. A woman whose address happens to be the same office building as St. Mary's primary law firm. This isn't a patient complaint. It's a manufactured fiction. Brennan's confident expression began to crack. Then Cooper testified. In clear, compelling terms, he described Derek Brennan's negligent misdiagnosis and Jasmine's life-saving intervention. He detailed how his medical charts had been altered after the fact to cover up Derek's mistakes. He presented his own copies of the original documentation, obtained legally through patient records requests before the modifications. Dr. Marshall saved my life, Cooper concluded, and she's being destroyed for it because she had the courage to expose incompetence in a powerful man's son. This isn't about drugs or patient safety. This is about retaliation and corruption. The board members exchanged troubled looks. Dr. Ellis called for a brief recess. During the break, Griffin pulled Jasmine aside. They're rattled. The evidence is too clear, but Brennan still has political influence with some board members. This could go either way. That's when Sarah Coleman, the DOJ attorney Griffin had contacted, entered the hearing room. She approached the board chairman and presented official documentation. Jasmine couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw Ellis's expression change from concern to shocked. When the hearing reconvened, Ellis looked grim. This board has been informed that the United States Department of Justice has opened a formal investigation into St. Mary's Medical Center regarding potential civil rights violations, medical fraud, and witness tampering. Several complaints against Dr. Marshall appear to be part of a broader pattern of discriminatory practices. Brennan shot to his feet. This is outrageous. You can't seriously— Chief Brennan, you're not recognized to speak. Ellis's tone was sharp. In light of this federal investigation and the significant evidentiary problems with the complaints presented today, this board finds insufficient grounds to suspend Dr. Marshall's medical license. All complaints are dismissed pending the outcome of the federal investigation. The room erupted. Brennan's face turned purple with rage. His lawyers immediately began objecting, demanding appeals, threatening legal action. But Ellis gavelled them silent. Furthermore, Ellis continued, this board will be conducting its own investigation into the allegations of falsified patient records and manufactured complaints presented here today. Chief Brennan, St. Mary's Medical Center, you should expect subpoenas for all relevant documentation. As the hearing concluded, Jasmine felt Griffin's hand on her shoulder. First victory, he said quietly, but this is far from over. Outside, the media had multiplied. This time, the questions were different. Dr. Marshall, do you believe you were targeted because of your race? Will you be filing a lawsuit against Chief Brennan? What's your response to the DOJ investigation? Jasmine stopped at the microphone setup against her lawyer's advice. She looked directly into the cameras. I became a doctor to save lives, she said simply. That's what I did, and that's what I'll continue to do. The truth has a way of revealing itself, and I have faith that justice will prevail. Short, dignified, impossible to twist. Griffin smiled approvingly as they left. That afternoon, Jasmine received a call from St. Mary's Hospital Board. Her suspension was lifted, effective immediately. She could return to work, but Griffin cautioned her. Brennan's cornered now. Cornered animals are most dangerous. Going back to that hospital puts you directly in his crosshairs. Good, Jasmine replied. Let him see that I'm not afraid. What she didn't know was that Brennan was already planning his most desperate move yet. And this time, it wouldn't just threaten her career. It would threaten her life. Jasmine's first shift back at St. Mary's felt like walking into enemy territory. The ER staff greeted her warmly. Most of them, at least. But she could feel the tension, see the nervous glances toward the administrative wing where Brennan's office loomed like a watchtower. Zoe pulled her aside during the first hour. Jazz, be careful. Brennan's been in meetings all week with lawyers and the board. People are saying he's planning something big. Let him plan, Jasmine replied, reviewing patient charts. I'm here to do my job. But she was careful. She documented every decision meticulously, copied colleagues on every email, and made sure witnesses were present for any significant interactions. Griffin had warned her that Brennan would be looking for any mistake, any opportunity to create a new complaint that might stick where the others had failed. The DOJ investigation was moving forward, but federal cases took time. Sarah Coleman had explained that they were interviewing witnesses, subpoenaing records, building an airtight case. But that process could take months, and Brennan knew it. He had a window to act before the walls closed in completely. On her third night back, Jasmine was treating a cardiac patient when she noticed something wrong with the medication order that had been entered into the system. The dosage was dangerously high, potentially fatal. She immediately corrected it, but when she checked the order history, her blood ran cold. The original order showed her name as the prescribing physician, but she'd never entered it. Zoe, she called her friend over, showing her the screen. Did you see me order this medication? Zoe's eyes widened. No, and that dosage would have killed him. Jazz, someone's trying to frame you for a fatal medication error. Jasmine immediately called Griffin, who instructed her to document everything and report it to hospital security. But when security arrived, they seemed less interested in investigating who had entered the false order than in questioning why Jasmine had been accessing the patient's chart. Standard protocol, Dr. Marshall, the security chief said, his tone neutral but his eyes cold. Any allegation of medication errors requires a full review. It was happening again. another manufactured crisis designed to build a case against her. That night, William Cooper called with disturbing news. "Dr. Marshall, I've been contacted by an investigator working for St. Mary's. He offered me $50, source zero, to recant my testimony about Derek Brennan's misdiagnosis. Said I was confused, still recovering from the stroke, that I didn't understand what had really happened." "Did you record the conversation?" "Every word." Cooper's voice was grim. "This is witness tampering, pure and simple. I've already forwarded the recording to the DOJ." The evidence was mounting, but so was Brennan's desperation. Griffin received intelligence through his network that Brennan had hired a crisis management firm, the same firm that had helped powerful men survive scandals by destroying their accusers' credibility. "They specialize in manufactured dirt," Griffin explained to Jasmine. "Fake social media accounts posting inflammatory content under your name, doctored photos, paid witnesses claiming past bad acts. They'll create an entire alternative narrative about who you are." "How do we fight that?" "By moving faster than they can fabricate." Griffin showed her a timeline. "The DOJ is ready to file charges within 2 weeks. We need to keep you safe and scandal-free until then. No mistakes, no opportunities for Brennan to create new accusations." But Brennan wasn't waiting 2 weeks. The next evening, Jasmine was leaving the hospital when she noticed a car following her. She took a random turn, and the car followed. Another turn, same result. Her heart racing, she called Griffin while driving toward the nearest police station. "Someone's tailing me," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Get to the station. I'm sending security to meet you there." Griffin's tone was urgent. "Don't stop for anything." But before she could reach the station, the car pulled alongside her at a red light. The window rolled down, and a man with a camera began photographing her frantically, as if she were fleeing the scene of a crime. She realized with horror what was happening. They were creating the appearance of erratic behavior, of someone with something to hide. She kept driving calmly, legally, directly to the police station. The photographer followed her into the parking lot, still shooting. When Griffin's security team arrived, they found the photographer's press credentials. He worked for a tabloid news site known for salacious medical scandal stories. "Let me guess," Jasmine said bitterly. "Someone tipped them off that I'd be leaving the hospital at exactly that time, suggested I was unstable, dangerous, worth following." The security chief nodded. St. Mary's public relations firm sent an anonymous tip to 3 news outlets about a troubled physician who might be a danger to herself or others. Classic character assassination setup, but they'd miscalculated. The photographer, when questioned by police, admitted he'd been paid by a PR firm to get dramatic photos of Jasmine. The firm's name was on the check, the same crisis management company Brennan had hired. Sarah Coleman, when informed of the incident, immediately filed a motion with the federal court for a restraining order against St. Mary's and Chief Brennan, citing witness intimidation and obstruction of justice. The next morning, federal marshals served Brennan with the order in his hospital office. He was prohibited from any contact with Jasmine, direct or indirect, and from taking any adverse employment action against her. Violation would result in immediate arrest for contempt. Jasmine watched from the ER as Brennan was served, his face turning red with humiliation as staff witnessed federal agents in his office. For the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. "He's running out of moves," Griffin observed. "But that makes him more dangerous, not less." That afternoon, Dr. Patricia Chen called. "Dr. Marshall, I've been contacted by 3 other physicians who worked under Brennan. They're ready to testify. The DOJ promised witness protection, and they're willing to go on record about Brennan's systematic harassment." With each new witness, each piece of evidence, the case against Brennan strengthened. But Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that his silence over the past few days was ominous. He wasn't giving up. He was planning something desperate. The security footage from that night would either prove Jasmine's innocence or become the final nail in her professional coffin. The federal restraining order should have ended Brennan's campaign of harassment. It didn't. It just made him more creative. On Monday morning, Jasmine arrived at work to find her office had been reassigned. Hospital administration claimed it was a routine space reorganization, But her new workspace was a converted storage closet in the basement, far from the ER, with no windows and barely enough room for a desk. When she objected, administration produced documentation showing the reassignment had been approved weeks ago, before the restraining order. Technically, Brennan hadn't violated the court order. He just set this humiliation in motion before being legally prevented from doing so. Griffin immediately filed a complaint with the court, but these things took time. Meanwhile, Jasmine worked from her closet, a daily reminder of Brennan's power. The medication error investigation dragged on. Despite clear evidence that someone had accessed the system using her credentials, hospital security claimed they couldn't determine who. The pharmacy technician who'd supposedly witnessed Jasmine's suspicious behavior couldn't be located for questioning. She'd transferred to another hospital immediately after giving her statement. Every day brought small indignities. Her parking access was revoked due to unpaid fees that didn't exist. Her hospital email was mysteriously hacked, sending inappropriate messages to colleagues that she had to publicly disavow. Equipment she requested for patient care was delayed or denied due to budget constraints. None of it technically violated the restraining order. All of it made her job nearly impossible. "He's trying to force you to quit," Zoe observed during a rare moment when they could talk privately. "Make working here so miserable that you leave voluntarily, which he can then spin as proof you were guilty all along." "I'm not quitting," Jasmine said firmly. But the stress was taking its toll. She wasn't sleeping, wasn't eating properly, jumped at every unexpected sound. This was what Brennan wanted, to break her psychologically where he couldn't destroy her professionally. William Cooper, now recovered enough to return to his law practice part-time, noticed her deterioration. "Dr. Marshall, you're being worn down deliberately. It's a classic harassment technique. Make the target's life so difficult they self-destruct." "What do I do?" "Document everything, but also take care of yourself. Brennan wins if you burn out before the case concludes." Cooper's eyes were kind but serious. "I've seen strong people break under this kind of sustained pressure. You need support." That evening, Griffin arranged for Jasmine to meet with Dr. Williams and Dr. Patterson, two of the physicians Brennan had previously forced out. They met at a private location, away from any possibility of surveillance. "He's using the same playbook," Dr. Williams confirmed, a black woman in her 40s who now practiced in California. "The death by 1,000 cuts approach. Make you paranoid, isolated, exhausted. I lasted 6 months before I couldn't take it anymore." "I lasted 8, Dr. Patterson added. She was white, which surprised Jasmine. She'd assumed all of Brennan's targets were minorities. "He goes after anyone who challenges him, but he's particularly vicious with women of color. With me, it was professional. With you and Dr. Williams, it's personal." They shared their experiences, the manufactured complaints, the isolation, the systematic destruction of their reputations. But they also shared strategies for survival, mental health support, documentation techniques, ways to maintain professional relationships despite Brennan's efforts to isolate them. "The difference now is the federal investigation," Williams pointed out. "We didn't have that. The DOJ takes this seriously. Civil rights violations, conspiracy, witness tampering. Brennan's facing actual criminal charges, not just professional discipline." "How long until charges are filed?" Jasmine asked. "Soon," Griffin answered. "Sarah Coleman says they're finalizing the indictment, multiple felony counts, but Brennan knows this, which is why he's getting more desperate." As if summoned by their words, Jasmine's phone buzzed with an alert. A news story had just broken. Federal investigation of St. Mary's Medical Center reveals widespread corruption. Someone had leaked details of the DOJ case to the media. The story outlined the investigation into Brennan, included testimony from former physicians, and specifically mentioned Jasmine as the catalyst for the federal probe. "Brennan leaked this," Griffin said immediately. "He's trying to control the narrative, make it look like a witch hunt against a respected medical administrator, instead of a legitimate investigation into corruption." The story was quickly picked up by national outlets. By evening, Jasmine's face was on news programs across the country, framed as the physician whose complaint sparked a controversial federal investigation into one of Philadelphia's leading hospitals. The backlash was immediate. Social media erupted with opinions from people who knew nothing about the case. St. Mary's board released a statement supporting Brennan and questioning the politically motivated federal investigation. Hospital donors threatened to withdraw funding. Jasmine's phone rang constantly. Reporters seeking comments, trolls leaving threatening voicemails, former colleagues calling to either support or condemn her. She had to change her number 3 times in 2 days. "This is his endgame," Cooper explained. "Make you so toxic that everyone wants you to disappear. The hospital, the medical community, even people who support you. He's trying to make you such a liability that fighting becomes more costly than surrendering." But that night, something unexpected happened. Patients began speaking out. It started with a woman who'd been treated by Jasmine 6 months ago. She posted on social media about how Jasmine had caught a medication allergy that another doctor had missed, potentially saving her life. The post went viral. Then others joined. Patients Jasmine had diagnosed, treated, comforted during their darkest moments. They shared stories of her compassion, her diagnostic brilliance, her dedication. Within 24 hours, "Stand with Dr. Marshall" was trending, countering Brennan's narrative with dozens of first-hand accounts of Jasmine's excellence. William Cooper added his voice, posting the security footage from the ER the night Jasmine saved his life, showing Derek Brennan's negligence and Jasmine's intervention. The video was viewed millions of times. Former colleagues began speaking out too, carefully, anonymously at first, then more openly as the tide of public opinion shifted. They described Brennan's tyrannical leadership, his protection of his incompetent son, his pattern of destroying talented physicians who threatened his authority. St. Mary's board suddenly found itself facing a public relations disaster. Donors were calling not to withdraw support from the hospital, but to demand Brennan's removal. The State Medical Association announced a formal review of leadership practices at St. Mary's. Griffin called Jasmine at midnight with news. The hospital board just held an emergency meeting. They're suspending Brennan pending the outcome of the federal investigation. He's been removed from all administrative duties, banned from hospital property. Jasmine felt a surge of relief, followed immediately by caution. "He's not going to go quietly." "No," Griffin agreed, "which is why you need to be more careful than ever. Brennan's losing everything. His position, his reputation, potentially his freedom. That makes him unpredictable." The warning proved prophetic. The next morning, Jasmine received a text from an unknown number. "You've destroyed everything I built. Now I'll destroy you." The message was traced to a burner phone, untraceable, but the threat was clear. Sarah Coleman immediately requested additional security for Jasmine and expedited the indictment process. "We're filing charges this week," she promised. "Once Brennan's in custody, he won't be able to threaten you." But custody was still days away, and Brennan's desperate gambit to silence Jasmine forever had one fatal flaw. He'd forgotten who her mentor was. Dr. Thomas Griffin had spent 40 years in medicine, building a reputation for integrity that opened doors across the healthcare industry. When he made calls, people answered. When he asked for favors, they were granted. And when someone threatened one of his protégés, he stopped being merely a physician and became something far more dangerous. A strategist with unlimited resources and no patience for corruption. The morning after Brennan's threatening text, Griffin assembled a team in his office. Jasmine, Sarah Coleman from the DOJ, William Cooper, and 3 private investigators he'd hired from a firm that specialized in corporate espionage. "Brennan made a mistake," Griffin began, his tone cold and calculated. "He threatened Dr. Marshall directly, which gives us legal grounds for immediate action. But more importantly, he's revealed something crucial. He's acting alone now. The hospital suspended him. His legal team is distancing themselves. Even his son is apparently cooperating with investigators to save his own career. Brennan's isolated, desperate, and making mistakes." One of the investigators pulled up surveillance footage on a large screen. "We've been tracking Brennan since the suspension. He's been meeting with some questionable characters. Yesterday, he paid $10 cash to a man named Marcus Webb, who has a record for intimidation and assault. Jasmine's blood ran cold. He hired someone to hurt me? Possibly. Webb's currently under surveillance. The moment he makes a move toward you, he'll be arrested. Coleman's expression was grim. But this also gives us leverage. Hiring someone to harm a federal witness is a felony that carries serious time. We can use this to pressure Brennan into a plea deal. I don't want a plea deal, Jasmine said firmly. I want him held accountable for everything he's done. So do I, Coleman agreed. But we need to be strategic. A plea deal where Brennan confesses to everything, implicates anyone who helped him, and agrees to cooperate with our broader investigation into St. Mary's might serve justice better than a trial he could potentially beat. He won't beat a trial, Griffin interjected. Not with the evidence we have. 5 former physicians willing to testify, documented evidence of falsified records, proof of witness tampering, financial records showing payments to people who filed false complaints. Brennan's going to prison. The only question is for how long. Over the next several hours, they refined their strategy. The investigators would continue tracking Brennan and Webb, documenting every action. Coleman would expedite the federal indictment and request an immediate arrest warrant based on the new threat. Griffin would work his contacts at St. Mary's to ensure Jasmine had full access to any evidence still stored in hospital systems. But they also prepared for Brennan's most desperate possibility, that he might try to flee. His passport was already flagged, his financial accounts monitored, but desperate men found ways. There's something else, Cooper said, pulling up a document on his laptop. I've been investigating Brennan's finances. He's been moving money around, liquidating assets, transferring funds to offshore accounts. This started 3 weeks ago, right after the DOJ investigation became known. He's preparing to run, Coleman concluded, which means we need to move faster than we planned. That afternoon, federal prosecutors filed a sealed indictment against Richard Brennan on 14 counts: conspiracy to violate civil rights, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, medical fraud, falsifying federal documents, and solicitation of violence against a federal witness. An arrest warrant was issued, and U.S. Marshals were dispatched to execute it. Jasmine watched from Griffin's office as news broke. Live television coverage showed federal agents arriving at Brennan's home in the affluent suburb of Bryn Mawr. Brennan wasn't there. Neighbors reported he'd left hours earlier with several suitcases. He ran, Griffin said, watching the screen. He actually ran. A manhunt began. Brennan's credit cards, phone, car, all were being traced. Airport security was alerted, border crossings notified. The FBI joined the search, treating it as a fugitive case. For Jasmine, the hours that followed were surreal. She was placed in protective custody as a precaution, staying in a secure location with federal protection. The hospital called to inform her that her suspension was permanently lifted, her office restored, and that the board wanted to meet with her about potential leadership opportunities once the legal matters concluded. The irony wasn't lost on her. A week ago, they'd been treating her like a criminal. Now they wanted her in leadership. Dr. Patricia Chen called, her voice excited. Dr. Marshall, the Pennsylvania Medical Board just announced a comprehensive review of complaint procedures at all private hospitals. They're calling it the Marshall Protocol, requiring independent investigation of any complaint against a physician by someone in their direct supervisory chain. This is systemic change because of what you exposed. Other former victims of Brennan's harassment began coming forward publicly. A Facebook group called Survivors of Medical Workplace Abuse formed overnight, with hundreds of physicians sharing stories of corruption and retaliation at hospitals across the country. Jasmine's case had become a catalyst for a broader movement, but Brennan was still free, still dangerous, still capable of causing harm. The break came at 11 p.m. Brennan had been spotted at a private airfield in New Jersey, attempting to board a charter flight to the Cayman Islands. Federal agents arrested him on the tarmac, finding $200 in cash in his luggage, and documents showing he'd purchased property in a country with no extradition treaty. Flight risk established. Brennan was denied bail and remanded to federal custody pending trial. Jasmine watched his perp walk on the news, the once powerful chief of medicine in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, his expression a mixture of rage and disbelief. This was the man who'd terrorized her for months, who'd destroyed careers and corrupted an entire institution. Now he was just another defendant facing justice. "It's over," Griffin said softly. "No," Jasmine corrected. "This part is over. Now comes accountability." The trap was set, the evidence was ready, and Chief Brennan was about to make the mistake that would end his career. The federal courthouse in Philadelphia was packed for Richard Brennan's arraignment. Media trucks lined the street, reporters jostling for position as federal marshals brought the former chief of medicine through a side entrance in shackles. Jasmine sat in the gallery between Griffin and William Cooper, watching the man who'd tried to destroy her face a magistrate judge who would determine his immediate fate. Brennan's attorney, a high-priced criminal defense lawyer from New York, immediately argued for bail. "Your Honor, Dr. Brennan is a respected physician with deep ties to this community. He has no prior criminal record, a family here, and substantial assets that ensure he won't flee." "He was arrested trying to flee to a country with no extradition treaty," Sarah Coleman countered sharply. "He had $200,000 in cash, fake identification documents, and had transferred over $2 million to offshore accounts in the week before his indictment. Dr. Brennan is the definition of a flight risk." The judge reviewed the evidence, her expression growing sterner as she read details of Brennan's attempted escape. "Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in federal custody pending trial." Brennan's face went pale. His wife, sitting in the front row, began crying. His son Derek stared at the floor, refusing to meet his father's eyes. As they led Brennan away, he turned to look directly at Jasmine. The hatred in his eyes was unmistakable, but so was something else. The dawning realization that he'd lost, completely and irrevocably lost. Outside the courthouse, Coleman held a brief press conference. "Today's arraignment is the first step in holding accountable a medical administrator who abused his position to target and destroy the careers of talented physicians. This case isn't just about Dr. Richard Brennan. It's about systemic corruption in healthcare institutions and the brave individuals who risked everything to expose it." Reporters shouted questions, but Coleman kept her statement brief and professional. The message was clear. The federal government was taking this seriously. That afternoon, St. Mary's Medical Center held its own press conference. The hospital board announced that Richard Brennan had been permanently terminated, that his son Derek had resigned from his residency program, and that the hospital was implementing comprehensive reforms to prevent future abuses of power. "We failed Dr. Jasmine Marshall and other physicians who tried to report concerns about Chief Brennan's conduct," the board chairman admitted, his discomfort evident. "We are committed to ensuring this never happens again." They announced the creation of an independent oversight committee to review all employment complaints, mandatory training on harassment and discrimination for all staff, and a new whistleblower protection policy. They offered Dr. Marshall a formal apology and an invitation to help design the new systems. Jasmine watched the press conference from Griffin's office, her emotions complicated. Justice was being served, but it had come at tremendous cost. Months of harassment, professional damage that would take years to fully repair, trauma that would likely never completely heal. "They're only acting because they got caught," she said bitterly. "If the DOJ hadn't gotten involved, Brennan would still be there, still destroying people." "True," Griffin acknowledged, "but that doesn't diminish what you've accomplished. You didn't just save yourself. You saved everyone who would have come after you." Over the next several days, the full scope of Brennan's corruption emerged. Federal investigators uncovered evidence of systematic fraud spanning 15 years. Dozens of physicians had been forced out through manufactured complaints, falsified records, and coordinated harassment campaigns. The hospital had paid out over $4 million in settlements to victims, all covered by NDAs that prevented them from speaking publicly. Dr. Patricia Chen's case became central to the criminal prosecution. Evidence showed Brennan had personally ordered the alteration of patient records to cover up Derek's misdiagnosis of the cancer patient. When Chen refused to participate in the cover-up, He'd launched the campaign that ended her career. This was never just about protecting his son, Coleman explained to Jasmine. It was about maintaining absolute control. Brennan saw St. Mary's as his kingdom. Anyone who challenged his authority became a target. The witness list for trial grew to include over 30 physicians, nurses, and staff members who'd experienced or witnessed Brennan's abuse. Many were terrified to testify. Even with Brennan in custody, such was the depth of fear he'd instilled. Jasmine spent hours on the phone with potential witnesses, encouraging them, sharing her own experience, promising that this time would be different. "He can't hurt you anymore," she told them. "He's in a cell, and he's going to stay there." William Cooper filed a civil lawsuit on behalf of 12 former St. Mary's physicians, seeking damages for wrongful termination, emotional distress, and civil rights violations. The hospital's insurance company immediately began settlement negotiations, knowing that a trial would expose even more institutional failures. But the criminal trial was what mattered most. That's where Brennan would face the full weight of his crimes. The trial was scheduled for 3 months out, giving prosecutors time to organize the massive amount of evidence. During that time, Jasmine returned to work at St. Mary's ER, determined to reclaim the career Brennan had tried to destroy. Her first day back in the ER proper, not the basement closet, but her actual department. The staff gave her a standing ovation. Nurses, doctors, technicians, even maintenance workers stopped what they were doing to applaud. Some were crying. "We should have stood up for you sooner," one of the senior nurses said, hugging Jasmine tightly. "We were afraid, and that's not an excuse. But we're not afraid anymore." The culture at St. Mary's was changing. Physicians who'd stayed silent during Brennan's reign now spoke openly about their experiences. The new interim chief of medicine held town halls where staff could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. It wasn't perfect. Years of institutional toxicity wouldn't heal overnight. But it was a beginning. Jasmine threw herself into her work, finding healing in the simple act of practicing medicine without looking over her shoulder. Every patient she diagnosed correctly, every life she saved, was a repudiation of Brennan's lies about her competence. One evening, she treated a young resident who'd made a diagnostic error. Nothing serious, but clearly distressing to the young doctor. Jasmine pulled her aside gently. "Mistakes happen in medicine," she said kindly. "What matters is how we respond to them. Learn from this, document it honestly, and move forward. That's how we become better physicians." The resident's eyes filled with tears. Under Brennan, admitting a mistake could end your career. Brennan's gone, and we're building something better. Jasmine squeezed her shoulder. "A culture where we can acknowledge errors, learn from them, and support each other. That's how medicine should be." As the trial date approached, Coleman kept Jasmine updated on the prosecution strategy. They would present Brennan's crimes in chronological order, starting with his earliest victims and building to Jasmine's case as the culmination of years of systematic abuse. "Your testimony will be last," Coleman explained. "You're the one who fought back, who exposed the whole system. The jury needs to see that this pattern ended only because someone had the courage to stand up." Jasmine felt the weight of that responsibility. Her testimony wouldn't just be about her own experience. It would represent every physician Brennan had silenced, every career he'd destroyed, every patient potentially harmed by the culture of fear he'd created. When the state medical board director walked into that hospital, he carried evidence that would shake the entire healthcare system. The trial of United States versus Richard Brennan began on a cold March morning, 3 months after his arrest. The courtroom was packed with former victims, journalists, and medical professionals who saw this case as a reckoning for healthcare corruption nationwide. Jury selection took 2 days. The prosecution sought jurors who understood power dynamics in professional settings. The defense wanted anyone skeptical of federal overreach, anyone who might view Brennan as a successful physician being persecuted for tough management decisions. In her opening statement, Sarah Coleman laid out the prosecution's case with devastating clarity. "This is a story about a man who spent 15 years building a kingdom of fear. Dr. Richard Brennan didn't just manage St. Mary's Medical Center. He controlled it through intimidation, fraud, and the systematic destruction of anyone who challenged his authority. She outlined the pattern. Talented physicians who questioned Brennan's decisions or exposed his son's incompetence were targeted with manufactured complaints, falsified records, and coordinated harassment campaigns. The evidence would show not just individual crimes, but a conspiracy involving hospital administrators, legal staff, and even some physicians who participated in Brennan's schemes to protect their own positions. The defense attorney painted a different picture. Dr. Brennan dedicated his life to St. Mary's, maintaining standards of excellence in a challenging healthcare environment. The physicians who've complained about him were dismissed for legitimate performance issues. What the prosecution calls corruption, we call accountability. But as the trial progressed, the defense's narrative crumbled under the weight of evidence. Dr. Patricia Chen was the first major witness. She testified for 6 hours over 2 days, detailing how Brennan had orchestrated her destruction after she refused to cover up Derek's cancer misdiagnosis. She presented original patient charts showing the correct diagnosis, then hospital-corrected versions showing Derek's notes magically improved after the fact. "The patient died," Chen said, her voice breaking. "Stage 4 cancer that would have been caught at stage 1 if Derek Brennan had done his job. And when I tried to report it, I became the problem. My career ended so his son could avoid accountability." The defense tried to discredit her, suggesting she was bitter about losing her job, but Chen's documentation was irrefutable. She'd kept copies of everything, anticipating that Brennan would try to rewrite history. Dr. Williams testified next, describing similar patterns. Brilliant diagnoses dismissed, manufactured complaints, systematic isolation. "I left Pennsylvania rather than continue fighting," she admitted. "I was exhausted, afraid, and I believed Brennan when he said he'd destroy me if I didn't surrender. I regret that surrender every day." One by one, witnesses described Brennan's tactics. A nurse testified about being pressured to file false complaints. A medical records clerk described being ordered to alter patient charts. A hospital administrator admitted to creating fake performance reviews under Brennan's direction. The most damning testimony came from Brennan's former executive assistant, who'd kept copies of emails showing Brennan explicitly ordering the harassment of specific physicians. He called it managing out the troublemakers. She testified. He had lists of physicians he wanted gone, with detailed plans for how to force them out. During cross-examination, the defense tried to suggest she'd fabricated the emails, but forensic analysis confirmed their authenticity. The metadata showed they'd been created on Brennan's computer, sent from his email account, during time periods when security logs confirmed he was the only one in his office. William Cooper testified about his stroke and Derek's negligent misdiagnosis, bringing the human cost of Brennan's protection of his son into sharp focus. "I would have died," Cooper said simply. "Dr. Marshall saved my life, and for that act of exceptional medicine, she was targeted for destruction." As the prosecution's case built, the courtroom audience could see the jury's expressions shifting. What had seemed like a he-said-she-said dispute was revealed as documented systematic corruption. Then came Jasmine's turn to testify. She took the stand on a Tuesday morning, wearing a professional suit, her bearing calm and confident. Coleman led her through her background. Medical school at Johns Hopkins, residency at a prestigious program, joining St. Mary's with stellar recommendations. "When did you first encounter resistance from Dr. Brennan?" Coleman asked. "My second month at St. Mary's. I corrected a dosage error in an order written by his son. It was a simple mistake, easily fixed. But Derek Brennan complained to his father that I'd undermined him in front of staff." "What happened?" "Chief Brennan called me into his office and told me that maintaining hierarchy was more important than nitpicking other physicians' orders. He said if I wanted to succeed at St. Mary's, I needed to learn when to keep my medical opinions to myself." Jasmine recounted the escalating pattern, being excluded from meetings, having her decisions second-guessed, facing manufactured complaints. Then came the night of the stroke patient and Derek's misdiagnosis. "I knew the patient was having a stroke," Jasmine testified. "The symptoms were textbook, but Dr. Derek Brennan had diagnosed intoxication and planned to send the patient home. If that had happened, the patient would have died. What did you do? I overrode Derek's orders and initiated stroke protocol. It saved the patient's life. And how did Chief Brennan respond? He suspended me, filed false complaints with the medical board, and began a campaign to destroy my career and potentially my freedom. For 2 days, Jasmine detailed every attack Brennan had launched. The fabricated drug allegations, the altered medical charts, the attempted bribery of witnesses, the hiring of someone to intimidate her. Coleman presented documentation for each claim: security footage, financial records, recorded phone calls. The defense attorney tried to break her during cross-examination, suggesting she was oversensitive, that she'd misinterpreted Brennan's actions, that the complaints against her had merit. Dr. Marshall, isn't it true that multiple colleagues filed complaints about your confrontational style? Those complaints were fabricated, Jasmine responded calmly. The dates on the complaints don't match when I was actually working with those colleagues. The medical board confirmed none of the complainants could provide specific examples of the behavior they allegedly witnessed. You're asking the jury to believe that a respected chief of medicine with a 20-year career would risk everything to target you specifically. I'm asking the jury to look at the evidence. Dr. Brennan didn't just target me. I'm one of at least 15 physicians he destroyed using the exact same methods. The evidence shows a pattern spanning years. When she stepped down from the witness stand, Jasmine felt lighter. She'd told her truth, provided documentation, and refused to be intimidated even by aggressive cross-examination. The prosecution rested its case. The defense presented only 2 witnesses, character witnesses who'd worked with Brennan years ago and testified he'd always seemed professional to them. But they couldn't explain the documented evidence of fraud, the falsified records, the witness tampering. In closing arguments, Coleman addressed the jury directly. Dr. Richard Brennan believed himself untouchable. For 15 years he was right. He destroyed careers with impunity, corrupted an institution, and escaped accountability. But Dr. Jasmine Marshall did something remarkable. She fought back, and in fighting back, she exposed a system of corruption that should outrage every person in this courtroom. The defense's closing argument tried to paint Brennan as a scapegoat for systemic problems in healthcare, but it rang hollow against the mountain of evidence. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they returned, Jasmine sat between Griffin and Cooper, her hands clenched in her lap. The 4-person stood. On the count of conspiracy to violate civil rights, we find the defendant guilty. 1 by 1, guilty verdicts on all 14 counts. Brennan showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but his wife sobbed in the gallery. His attorney immediately filed notice of appeal, but everyone knew it was futile. The evidence was too strong, the convictions too solid. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 months later. Federal guidelines suggested Brennan faced 20 to 30 years in prison. Outside the courthouse, Jasmine stood with the other physicians who'd testified, all of them survivors of Brennan's reign. This isn't just about him, she told the assembled reporters. It's about every person who abuses power and believes they'll never face consequences. Today proved them wrong. Jasmine's testimony would take 20 minutes to deliver and 20 seconds to destroy Richard Brennan's carefully constructed empire. 2 months after the verdict, on a warm May morning, Richard Brennan stood before Judge Patricia Morrison for sentencing. The courtroom was again packed, but the atmosphere was different now. Not the tension of trial, but the solemnity of judgment. Victims were allowed to give impact statements. Dr. Patricia Chen spoke first, her voice steady as she described how Brennan's destruction of her career had affected her family, her mental health, her sense of self-worth. I spent years believing I deserved what happened, she said. That's what abuse does. It makes you doubt your own competence, your own reality. Today, I reclaim my truth. Others followed. 15 physicians, 3 nurses, 2 administrators who'd been forced out for refusing to participate in Brennan's schemes. Each story was unique, but the pattern was identical: manufactured complaints, systematic harassment, careers destroyed. Jasmine spoke last. She looked directly at Brennan as she addressed the court. I became a doctor to save lives. That's all I ever wanted to do. Dr. Brennan tried to take that from me because I exposed his son's negligence. But his attacks didn't just harm me. They harmed every patient who might have been treated by the physicians he destroyed. They harmed the integrity of medicine itself. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I don't hate Dr. Brennan. I pity him. He had a position of trust, authority, and respect. He could have used that power to mentor, to improve healthcare, to build something meaningful. Instead, he built a system of fear and corruption. That was his choice, and now he faces the consequences of that choice. When the victim statements concluded, Judge Morrison addressed Brennan directly. Dr. Brennan, you have been convicted of 14 felonies involving the systematic abuse of your position to destroy the careers and lives of physicians who threatened your authority. The evidence showed not impulsive acts of anger, but calculated, premeditated campaigns of destruction spanning years. She reviewed the crimes, the victims, the institutional damage. Your actions undermined the integrity of medical practice, violated the civil rights of numerous individuals, and potentially endangered patients by removing talented physicians from practice. The harm you caused is incalculable. Brennan's attorney made a final plea for leniency, citing his client's age, health issues, and previous contributions to medicine. Brennan himself read a brief statement claiming he'd only tried to maintain standards and that he'd been misunderstood. Judge Morrison was unmoved. The defendant has shown no genuine remorse, no understanding of the harm he caused. Accountability requires acknowledgement, and I see none here. The sentence came down. 28 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole before serving at least 20 years. Brennan would be 96 years old before he could walk free. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Brennan's wife screamed. His attorney immediately declared they would appeal, but Brennan himself seemed to shrink in his chair, the reality finally penetrating. This was real, final, and irreversible. As federal marshals led him away in shackles, Brennan looked once more at Jasmine. The hatred was gone from his eyes, replaced by something like disbelief. He'd genuinely never imagined this outcome. After 20 years of untouchable power, he'd believed himself immune to consequences. Outside the courthouse, Sarah Coleman addressed the media. Today's sentence sends a clear message. Abuse of power in healthcare will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. This case began with one physician's courage to fight back, but it exposed systemic problems that extend far beyond one hospital. She announced that the DOJ was launching investigations into 3 other medical centers where similar patterns of harassment and corruption had been reported. The Marshall case had become a template for holding healthcare institutions accountable. St. Mary's Medical Center held its own press conference, announcing comprehensive reforms. The new chief of medicine, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, had been recruited from outside specifically to rebuild the department's culture. We're not just changing policies, she said. We're changing how we think about power, accountability, and physician welfare. The hospital established a $10 million fund to compensate physicians Brennan had forced out, independent of any legal settlements. They created the Marshall Fellowship Program, providing support and mentorship for physicians facing workplace harassment, and they commissioned an independent investigation into how Brennan had maintained power for so long, despite multiple warning signs. For Jasmine, the sentencing brought closure, but also the beginning of a new chapter. She'd been offered the position of ER medical director at St. Mary's, but after careful consideration, she declined. The hospital held too many painful memories. Instead, she accepted a position at the state medical board, working with Dr. Thomas Griffin to design and implement physician protection programs across Pennsylvania. Her job was to ensure that what happened to her, and to Brennan's many other victims, could never happen again. The system failed us, she told a medical conference 6 months after the trial. Hospital boards ignored complaints. Medical societies looked the other way. Powerful physicians abused their positions because institutions protected power over people. That changes now. The Marshall Protocol became law in Pennsylvania, requiring independent investigation of all workplace complaints involving supervisory physicians. Other states began adopting similar measures. Healthcare organizations nationwide revised their policies, created whistleblower protections, and established oversight mechanisms. William Cooper's civil lawsuit resulted in a $47 million settlement for 12 physicians Brennan had targeted, sending a clear financial message to hospitals about the cost of enabling harassment. Several hospital board members resigned, acknowledging their failure to act on early warnings about Brennan's conduct. Derek Brennan, who'd cooperated with federal prosecutors in exchange for immunity, lost his medical license permanently. He issued a public apology acknowledging his role in his father's crimes and his own negligent patient care. The statement seemed genuine, though whether he'd truly changed or simply recognized the futility of denial remained unclear. Zoe remained at St. Mary's, becoming a vocal advocate for workplace safety. She and Jasmine remained close friends, their bond strengthened by shared trauma and triumph. Dr. Chen returned to Pennsylvania, accepting a position at a hospital that actively recruited her because of her role in exposing corruption. "I'm reclaiming what was taken from me," she said. "My career, my dignity, my love of medicine." A year after Brennan's sentencing, Jasmine was invited to speak at Johns Hopkins's graduation ceremony. Standing before hundreds of new physicians, she shared her story. Not as a victim, but as someone who'd fought for integrity and won. "You're entering a profession with immense power," she told them. "Power over patients' lives, power within institutions, power that can be used for tremendous good or devastating harm. You'll face moments when speaking up costs you, when staying silent seems safer. I'm here to tell you, speak up anyway. The cost of silence is always higher than the cost of courage." The graduates gave her a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. That evening, Jasmine received an email from a young physician in Oregon who'd seen her speech online. "I've been experiencing harassment from a senior physician for months," the email read. "I was going to quit medicine. But after hearing your story, I'm filing a formal complaint. Thank you for showing me that fighting back is possible." Jasmine replied immediately, connecting the physician with resources, offering support, sharing the lessons she'd learned. This was her purpose now. Not just practicing medicine, but protecting those who practiced it. She thought about Brennan sometimes, aging in a federal prison, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about corruption and consequences. She felt no satisfaction in his suffering, but neither did she regret his punishment. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability, deterrence, and the hope that others would think twice before abusing their power. 2 years after Brennan's conviction, Jasmine received news that he'd suffered a stroke in prison. The irony wasn't lost on her. The man whose son had misdiagnosed a stroke, leading to everything that followed, now experienced one himself. She felt no schadenfreude, only a quiet acknowledgement of life's circularity. She never visited him. There was nothing left to say. Instead, she focused on the future. The Marshall Protocol had protected 43 physicians in its first 2 years. The DOJ had successfully prosecuted 5 more cases of healthcare corruption using the template established by Brennan's case. Medical schools were incorporating ethics training specifically addressing abuse of power and institutional corruption. Change was happening, slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably. On the 3rd anniversary of the night she'd saved William Cooper's life, the night that changed everything, Jasmine stood in the ER at her new hospital, treating patients, teaching residents, living the career Brennan had tried to steal. A young black female resident approached hesitantly. "Dr. Marshall, I just wanted to say thank you. I'm here because of you. When I was deciding whether to pursue medicine, I read about your case. It showed me that the profession could change, that people like us could not only survive, but thrive." Jasmine smiled, remembering her own mentors, the people who'd shown her what was possible. "The profession changes because we change it," she replied. "Every time we speak up, every time we refuse to accept injustice, we make it better for those who come after." That night, driving home under a sky full of stars, Jasmine reflected on the journey from that terrible night in the ER to this moment of peace and purpose. Brennan had tried to break her, to silence her, to destroy everything she'd worked for. He'd failed. And in failing, He'd sparked a movement that would protect countless others from suffering what she and so many physicians before her had endured. Justice had prevailed. Not quickly, not easily, but completely. And that, Jasmine thought, was worth every moment of the fight. Thank you to everyone who shared their thoughts and locations with us. Seeing this global community united for accountability and truth proves that justice is a universal human value. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more stories of courage triumphing over corruption. Until next time, remember that standing up for what's right in healthcare isn't just about one person. It's about protecting everyone who comes after.